A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mongu Shampagi. And we continue the debate tonight on the budget presented in the national budget, which was presented by Minister Matia Kasaija to Parliament and to the nation on Thursday. We also take a snapshot of the budgets of the other East African countries. Uganda's budget is 40.5 trillion Uganda shillings, or 10.7 billion US dollars. The Kenyan budget is 3 trillion Kenya shillings. That represents 30 billion United States dollars. Was presented by Henry Rotich on the same day as the Ugandan budget was presented. Tanzania presented a budget of 33.1 trillion Tanzania shillings, or 14.3 billion United States dollars. That means Kenya has the biggest budget at 30 billion US dollars, followed by Tanzania at 14.7 billion, 14.3 billion dollars, followed by Uganda at 10.7 billion United States dollars. Of course, all those are converted into the respective local currencies. Across the border in Rwanda, Rwanda has presented a budget of the Rwandan budget. Yes, Rwanda's budget is 2.8 trillion Rwanda francs, or 3.16 billion United States dollars. That's the fourth biggest budget within the East African region. And of course, the one of Burundi is the only budget that's under a billion United States dollars. I think it's about 725 million United States dollars. And this is a jump from last year's budget of 676 United States dollars. The difference between these countries is that Burundi is the only country that is trying as much as possible to meet its budget from its own domestic revenues at 88%. Only 12% will be funded through other means. How they manage to raise that, we will be investigating. And then there's a significant jump in expected borrowing. These budgets are looking to heavy borrowing. We'll be interrogating what the Ugandan budget has, where the money will come from, and what it can do. We also need to mention at the beginning of the show the scandal. Bank of Uganda, the central bank, has been engulfed in scandal after scandal. The latest one is the most confusing. Did the central bank print more money than it was supposed to print? Did it carry extra cargo that it was not supposed to carry on that chartered flight? What exactly is the story? There's been a competition almost from the different institutions to send statements. So Edith Nakalema from State House, the anti-corruption unit, sent a statement after the raid and arrests at Bank of Uganda. Bank of Uganda issued its own statement. Uganda Revenue issued its own statement, like kicking back the ball and saying we are not responsible for what went on. But that scandal, we'll discuss it as and when we get a little bit more details. And of course, the fallout from the closure of the 7 banks over the years hasn't ended yet, with the controversy over whether Mubarak Munyagwa can continue with the investigation or not. And lastly, but not least, we'll not discuss this at this time, is the apparent forensic audits into civil society organizations and what that means. I've seen Ofono Pondo writing a very glowing article in the Sunday Vision today about those scandals. To discuss the budget and the budgets of East Africa broadly, with me tonight I have at the extreme end the business editor at the Daily Monitor, Lydia Namono. Very nice to have you.
Thank you. Good evening, viewers.
And good to have you back after discussing the State of the Nation address last Sunday. Also making a return is Jeff Mbanga. Jeff is a business editor at the Observer newspaper. Jeff, very nice to have you once again.
Thank you so much, Charles. Good to be back.
And last but not least, we have Dicta Asimwe. Dicta is a business writer at... you write business, you write everything.
I write everything.
He's a journalist with the East African newspaper. Very nice to have you, Dicta.
Thank you, Charles. Good evening, viewers.
Dicta, I want to start with you. Looking at the budgets as they are, even before we go to where the money is coming from, all the budgets are growing and growing significantly. Uganda's budget shows the biggest jump from 32 trillion to 40 trillion shillings.
Yeah.
What does this mean? And you can look at the others, all of them are going up across the region.
Well, with the exception of of the military and security, I should say, not just military, because some of those budgets were in other places. But with the exception of security and works and transport, there wasn't much increase elsewhere. So what does the jump mean? It just means we have to keep paying our loans, because we still have a significant part of our budget going to pay interest and paying and refinancing debt. So that's what mostly it means. But it also means that we could be seeing a problematic financial year where we might get inflation, we might see our exchange rate going down, because it looks like the state, which is not a productive sector of the economy, is also the biggest spender. And if someone who is not producing is spending the most money in the economy, what happens? It means you'll have problems of inflation, you'll have problems of high, because they are saying they'll be importing, for example, military equipment, they'll be importing things for construction of roads and the rest. And all that means we could see the shilling losing value. All that is an effect of the state spending basically more than the rest of the country. They have more involvement in the market than the rest of the country, and that is never good.
You say in your report for the East African this week that these budgets are expansionary with ambitious revenue targets that are likely to be missed, leading to more borrowing amid rising concerns over looming debt distress. What exactly do you mean?
Well, for Uganda, it might not necessarily be borrowing. I am sure we shall have some money going into the petroleum fund, and if that happens, that's most likely that's where we'll be going to get money from, because that's what has been happening. We have been rapidly reducing our petroleum fund. It's supposed to be there for generations to come, but as we speak, we almost have it at zero, and we are hoping that we shall get more money in.
We put in some money, removed all of it.
Yeah,
we expect that we'll put in some more money
and take it out. So for Uganda, it will be borrowing, yes, because for this financial year that's ending this June, we borrowed around 380 billion for classified expenditure. So it's also possible that we shall be going to the domestic market, which pushes out the local businesses, but it's also possible we shall be looking to
local borrowers, because you're keeping interest rates, commercial interest rates
very high.
Jeff, let me come to you quickly. You have a budget deficit, the Ugandan budget. That jump from 32 to 40 represents an 8% deficit. Yeah. How do you fill that gap? How does the government plan to fill that gap?
You just have to collect more tax revenue.
But if you look at the tax revenues provided, you're going to collect slightly above half of the budget.
20 trillion.
Yeah, about
20 trillion. Yes.
Yes.
So the 20 trillion has to come from somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, your foreign exchange earnings, have to increase, so you need to boost your export. You have to borrow less. So if you look at some of the tax measures, on toothbrushes, on all sorts of things, on grain and that kind of stuff, on pens, that is in a way supposed to reduce on the imports of goods coming into the market. So government is trying to increase the percentage of locally made goods in our supermarkets. So you're going to see a lot of revenue streams, coming from that side. So those are the only solutions that government has to really.
What's been the experience before when you have done a budget that appears protectionist on outlook? Because you're trying to reduce the amount of American Garden ketchup on supermarket stalls, so that you can replace it with Reco ketchup. Has it worked before?
I mean, when you're going to pursue protectionist policies, then the issue of standards has to come in. Issues of a trade retaliation may also come in, but you also have to understand where these goods are coming from. So if they are coming from markets where we do not have such a strong balance of payment, but how can I call it, the level of balance of payment in those countries, then we do not have so much to worry about these protectionist levels. But now the issue is going to be on the issue on standards, on quality, on quantity. Can we meet the demands of the market? Do we have the right goods for the market? So at this point, I wouldn't worry about the protectionist policy that government is coming up with. It's supposed to help the local market thrive.
Maybe just to make an addition onto that
Sure.
protectionist policy on import substitution precisely. We have seen other countries which tried going the import substitution way. They may have had some wins, but somewhere along the way, they made some gaps. What are some of those gaps? There are issues to do with the cost of accessing finance. There are issues to do with the cost of labor. There are issues to do with the cost of raw materials. Now here we are trying to encourage, local industries to step up and produce the much needed goods which we are actually importing. But the question is, why are we importing those goods? At the moment, those goods seem cheaper. It seems cheaper to import them. So what are we doing to encourage the local industries to actually set up? You might have seen a raft
So
of
prohibitive taxes is one of them, because I see some of these items,
Yes.
you're jumping taxes from 20% to 60%.
60%.
You're
yes.
jumping from 10% to 35%.
Yes.
That's quite a significant jump on things like toothbrushes, on things like ketchup,
Toilet paper,
toilet
exercise
paper,
books.
ketchup. For my, I need to break that down. Tomato sauce.
Yes.
Yes, basic things like that. You're trying to encourage that to be produced locally and jumping up the taxes significantly. The
Yes.
question we're discussing even before we came on air was, where does this tax revenue go? How does it incentivize the local manufacturer? It's simply because you have increased taxes and the expectation is the imported good is going to be more expensive than the local good. You're going to load it on the consumer to make a decision whether they buy a cheaper but inferior quality local product or continue to pay a higher price for what they think is a better quality imported product. So how does that actually help? And someone was asking, I think one of us was asking, if you're getting the money, you have, like Victor said at the beginning of the show, you have a budget that maintains government as a heavy consumer even when it is not a producer. Yeah? So you have, you're taking these taxes and you think, okay, we have some more money here. We need a new fleet. We're going into campaign. So all government departments that are going to use government vehicles to do individual campaigns, or even for campaigns like for the president or for ministers and other people, are going to have to acquire possibly new wheels to facilitate that rigorous movement up country. Does that help the local manufacturer? How does it? Is the
Well,
question. And all of you can pick it up after Lydia.
that is really now a challenge, because when you look at an economy which relies largely on consumption rather than production, then there is reason to worry. Why? Because for a policy like import substitution to actually take off, we must have the capacity to produce more, and to produce more for not only the local market, but also the export market. In other words, this policy must have the power to morph into an export-led initiative. But at the moment, we are still struggling with exports because of issues like standards, which one of my colleagues mentioned. So there is a lot more we need to do to encourage Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, in terms of attitudinal change, in terms of the quality of the products that we want to produce. How do we get there? Are we nurturing the talent that needs to actually produce these products, or we are just...
I can suppose Dicta and Jeff are itching.
No.
Dicta should, maybe you come in first, yes.
Okay, so here's the thing. Government is taxing these things at 60% and then going into the market and paying 14% interest rate on the money they are borrowing. For a private sector player, it means they have to pay more because private individuals are riskier than government. So if government's rate is 14%, my guess would be the private sector will pay 20%. And if you're paying 20% interest rate on the money you're borrowing, on the money you're using, you're paying a lot of money for electricity that you're using, because we still have very high electricity rates. You cannot afford to, and therefore you maybe have to squeeze the workers, and that might push the quality down. So you can increase taxes all you want. For those who are rich, they'll still pay for the American garden ketchup. For those who are poor, they can do without.
They'll deal with.
They can do without the ketchup. I mean,
options.
how many Ugandans take ketchup? Very few. So
Or maybe they will do with the one that's under the radar for taxation, that is packed in polythene bags.
Yeah,
and still makes its way onto the market. Jeff, let me come to you. Lydia and Victor are talking about this. There are other factors. There are other measures that need to be taken to encourage local production. One of them, I think you talked about it, cost of electricity remains very high, and questions of reliability remain somehow, in spite of the fact that we have increased power production capacity in the country over the years. Number two, you have, do you see in Matia Kasaija's budget anything that actually works to address those other impediments to local manufacturing, to build Uganda, buy Uganda, build Uganda?
I mean, he, like he's done over the years. I mean, he's increased the budget allocation for works. So that kind of opens up markets. I mean, if you're going to construct good roads and that kind of stuff, so that is going to open up new markets for the local manufacturers to be able to sell their products. But the whole issue, but also the whole issue of taxing all these funny items, if I may call them that, is I mean, it's a sign that we have a problem in this country, which is dumping. You know, we have so many products that come to this market at very low prices, and this I do not think these taxes are in a way supposed to raise the revenue that this country is looking for. I think it's just supposed to limit the amount of dumping that we experience in this market. So
is that achievable? What else do you need to do to reduce the dumping?
Dumping, unfortunately, dumping, you have to be protectionist. I mean, I do not see any other solutions.
Okay, just a quick one to all of you. If you look across, I introduced all the budgets for the 5 East African countries, apart from South Sudan, because South Sudan didn't read their budget at the same time as the others. Burundi was joining for the first time to read the budget on the same day as the other countries read their budget. But all the budgets appear to be inward-looking. They appear to be protectionist.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the community? You're the one who covers the East African community most closely.
Well, one of the taxes that I've seen that is interesting is that I've seen it in Rwanda. I think it's also for Uganda. It's a tax on furniture and on timber. Timber is going at zero rate, so that they can allow in timber for local manufacturers to make or juakali, I should say, to make their own chairs, and then increasing the one on furniture so that you have less furniture coming in. So yeah, it's been protectionist, but again, I think it's the same problems for the whole, maybe with the exception of Kenya. It's the same problems. We don't have enough manufacturing. Our manufacturers deliver slightly low quality. It's the same problems for the region. And
no. My question is, if Kenya is trying to protect its own industries, Uganda wants to protect its own industries, Rwanda does the same, Tanzania does the same, and you've had spats between Kenya and Tanzania, significant. Since February, the border between Uganda and Rwanda has been closed. We checked the numbers. We have a story in the East African. We checked the numbers. Uganda has been losing at least about $170 million in exports to Rwanda for every month that border has been closed. They are trying to ease it now. It's beginning to ease. The biggest loser actually is Kenya, because Kenya sends a lot of its manufactured products into the Rwandan market, and they also dominate the transport sector into Rwanda. You have Rwanda is also a loser. It's a smaller economy. You can see by the size of its budget. It's a much smaller economy. It's been losing $26 million in exports to Uganda for every month the border has been closed. And Tanzania, interestingly, has also been a loser in this whole in this matter, because some of some goods going into Rwanda move through the Mutukula border, enter Uganda, and go back into Rwanda through Katuna. If all these countries are trying to close off manufactured products even from neighbors, what does that mean?
No.
Can you hold that until after a very
puts-
short commercial break? We'll pick it up. You're still watching The Fourth Estate, and we're discussing the budget that was presented to Parliament and to the nation on Thursday. 40.5 trillion Uganda shillings, or an equivalence of 10.7 billion United States dollars. That presents a jump from last year's budget, which was 32.7 trillion, or an 8.2 deficit from the one we had last time. In Kenya, Henry Rotich, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, presented a budget of 3 trillion Kenyan shillings, which is equivalent to 30 billion United States dollars. That's 3 times the Ugandan budget, about 3 times. And that is leaving a deficit of 5.7% to the Kenyans. Philip Mpango, the Tanzanian Minister for Finance, presented the budget for Tanzania. It is at 33.1 trillion, or 14.3 billion United States dollars. That's bigger by than the Ugandan budget by 4 billion United States dollars. So it's the second biggest economy in the country. The one from Rwanda is at 2.8 trillion Rwanda francs, or 3.16 billion United States dollars. And of course, Tanzania comes in last with a budget of 725 million United States dollars, jumping up from 676 million last year. It's the only budget that's below a billion shillings, and it's going to be funded 88% through domestic revenues. The other countries are heavily reliant on borrowing. We'll discuss that shortly. But Victor, you're arguing the question of this protectionist agenda. How, the scenarios we created already, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda more recently have had spats over issues like Ugandan sugar. That's been a long-running debate, a long-running fight between Kenya and Uganda. I think there's still been negotiation on whether Uganda can export beef to Kenya, or Kenyan beef coming into Uganda. You've had questions about day-old chicks, raising a lot of ruckus among the East African community. If you're trying to build an East African community, free movement of goods and services within the community, you're trying to go into a monetary union in 2024, about 2024?
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
supposed to be.
Yes.
the date.
How do these protectionist policies come in, especially amongst themselves?
Well, I don't think the protectionist policies are supposed to be targeting East African partner states. You have what you call the common external tariff. What I think is happening, what I see happening though, is that it's no longer a common external tariff, because it looks like every country is now charging their own common external tariff now. That's strange. But otherwise, the fight...
They're charging their own external tariff,
Yeah,
whether it
which-
is common or not.
Yes, so
Yes.
that's the
Yeah.
strange bit. But
Yes.
otherwise, when they say 60% on, 35% on, say, motorcycle tires or whatever, it's not targeting tires from Kenya, for example. It's targeting from other countries. So that's not the problem. The problem is the fights that will emerge of, Uganda has this cooking oil. It's not really from Uganda. It's from somewhere else.
The debate we're having over sugar.
Yes,
I think
yes.
Uganda is
So-
trying to export sugar it has imported.
It has imported, yeah. So those
So
are
dump
the,
it in Kenya,
yeah.
basically.
So those are the problems, and those speak to the lack of cohesion at the East African community, and maybe the lack of proper ways that countries respect, where they can go discuss and believe the results of that discussion. That's what it speaks to. But otherwise, I don't think these protectionist taxes, they are supposed to protect the whole East African community, not so much Uganda specifically or Rwanda specifically. It's supposed to protect everyone. So
Okay.
yeah, that's
Jeff, a quick one, because I know that some of these rates were agreed at the East African Council of Ministers. I think they discussed these, some of these taxes for protection of the domestic manufacturing within the community before they went and the different finance ministers went and included them in their budgets and announced them. But there have been these fights between the member states, which have all been, we've been reporting them. How do they help the region, one, for its cohesion purposes, but also to increase its manufacturing? You still have Kenya dominating significantly in this market, and other countries are trying to say, no, some of these will not take in. I don't know if my question is clear.
As in, how do these fights affect the cohesion of the East African community?
Yes.
And industrialization.
And industrialization.
Obviously. But you know, at some point, like I was saying, I mean, these countries will level themselves out. You know, if you look at this budget, the issue of the citizen has been further clarified. And that's for the East African business community. And government is trying to attract members from these other countries to mostly invest in the free trade zones that the government is trying to create. But also, there's also the issue of, the issue of protectionism and all these fights is normally a political question. I mean, when it comes to countries trying to protect their industries, I think I always look at these fights as there's something much deeper behind all these fights that we see, and it will take a political solution for some of the things. And sometimes we lie to ourselves that, you know, the common external tariffs and these non-tariff barriers that we're trying to eliminate from the region will work. It will take us some time to come up with a monetary union with the same currency in the market and that kind of stuff. So these fights will always be there. So I think that is something that we have to live with, and they will be resolved politically. But in terms of the cohesion, we're a small region. We're a small market of just over 130, 140 million people. We need to work within. We need to work. We need to work with each other, and there will still be trade among the East African countries. So I wouldn't worry so much about these fights right now.
Okay. There's a question put to you just before I come to you, Lydia, before I took the break. The other impediments to a robust local manufacturing industry, and whether this budget actually speaks to them. You're beginning on the question of the allocation to roads and other and other areas.
Yeah.
If you could just conclude your thought on that, how does this budget, beyond the taxes, actually practically encourage the setting up of the domestic industry and the growth of the domestic industry?
Quite interestingly, I thought Finance Minister Matia Kasaija was a little honest when I was reading about this budget. You know, he talked about the quality of the labor in this country. It is too low, and that in a way affects the growth of the local industry. I mean, if the quality of your labor force is low, it's going to affect your industry. He talked about issues of malnutrition, issues of poverty. He talked about the cost of traffic congestion in this town. I think we're losing about $800 million per year because of traffic. All that affects industrialization. He talked about also the inequality. The gap between the poor and the rich is widening. So all those are issues that are going to that affect the growth of a local industry. What he did not talk about, and I did not expect to talk about it, is the cause of all these problems that we have. He intentionally left that out. I think he knows where the problem is. But in terms of trying to...
What do you think the problem is?
I mean, it's poor governance. Let's not beat around the bush. Really, it's misallocation of resources, squandering of public resources.
You know, on Monday last
corruption and that kind of stuff.
Monday? No, not Monday last week. And I was discussing this with the colleagues in the office. This inequality, the gap between those who have and those who don't have, is so glaring, even among formally employed people, professionals like us. Yes. The National Social Security Fund did a money talk just behind us here at the Serena Conference Center. And we were told then is a very shocking and disturbing number. Majority, 93% of formerly employed people contributing to National Social Security Fund, after saving for 20 years, will collect only 15 million shillings on average. 15 million shillings. That's 3,000 United States dollars as savings for over 20 years. And that is 93% of Ugandan workers.
Wow.
It was a very, very shocking number, because you interact with the gap between those who have and those who don't have, the rich and the poor, from with an external lens. You never get to say, by the way, the person I'm sitting next to, do we fit in the same boat? Who are those? What is that exclusive club of the 7%? I'm waiting for those numbers. And even that 7%, you'll find there is a larger section, maybe 6%, who will have savings going up to 50 million shillings. Then there's exclusive 1% that have 50 million shillings and above when they retire after saving for 20 years or 25 years or 30 years. And so I was wondering if they're talking about reforming the pension sector and how you can access your money to get a portion of it. And I'm thinking, well, if you go and collect, even if it was 50% of your savings of 20 years,
Now.
and you're only able to collect $1,500, which is about
I think there is a real big problem there.
about 7 million shillings. What do you do with it? What don't you do with it? How do you save? How do you invest? So who are these people going to do this investment? If the minister is talking about unemployment, he's talking about poverty, he's talking about these things, do you see that the budget presents ways in which a wholesome, a comprehensive government reflection that these are challenges and we need to address them?
Well, there is a real issue in terms of investing in human capital, but also, most importantly, in financial literacy. Many people get jobs, start saving, somewhere along the way, issues come up, and they misuse that money. Others have that money, but they don't know what to put it, how to use it, or how to grow it.
I was looking at this a little differently, because if you look at the gap in the savings, these are statutory savings. If you look at the gap, it means a majority of the people who are formerly employed in this country are earning salaries way below the minimum wage, if there should be a minimum wage, and in spite of the discussion was trying to talk about how you invest the balance of the 95% that doesn't go to the first saving, how you save private on your own. But this reflects on the salaries people are earning. So who are these people going to turn into consumers? Who are these people going to turn into savers and therefore investors to pull this money to build a domestic industry?
You see, when you say after 20 years you have 15 million, it means that someone has been earning less than $1 million shillings as gross.
Yes.
And less than $1 million shillings as... and by the way, my calculation had been at 10 years. It hadn't been at 20, but if it's 20, it's much lower. So it might even, if I'm not mistaken, it might be 500,000, and that's gross. So that's the group that you have that is supposed to consume. But then you have a government that lives like a first world. Even the first world doesn't live like some of our governments. So that's the problem, that you have a government that is spending 40.5 trillion or to buy cars, to live a certain life that the rest of us can't afford. And then you have a population that is supporting them but can't afford their lives. That's why we have 53% of our children under 5 malnourished, because parents can't afford to feed their children. 53%, that's more than half of the population of our children under 5 are malnourished, which means even their growth, their future achievement is all going down.
Stunted there.
They are stunted, and because when you're stunted, you're not as smart as you would have been. You'd never meet your potential. So you have and you can't say that parents don't love their children. So what's the problem? It's because they can't afford to feed them. And I mean, being malnourished means you have no access to milk and maybe beans. It's not like very hard. It's
essentially
protein.
It's basics.
Yes.
So you have a government that is living large and people who can barely afford to feed their children. So that's
How
that's
much
a
is a
big-
litre of milk now?
Pardon?
Between 2,500 and
Yeah,
3,000, just a litre of
2,000,
milk.
yeah.
That's a liter of milk that is processed.
Processed.
Because the story is fundamentally different for the producers at farm gate. The price is much lower. They can't even keep the cows because the price is miserly at the farm gate. It leads to something else. The impact of this, I don't know how much Kasaija talked about corruption in this country,
He did not.
and he did not, and how this budget helps to address that question. If you look at the allocation for agencies that are supposed to be fighting against corruption, there is no growth in those areas. The allocation.
No. The allocation actually grew because if you look at accountability and the
Accountability,
others,
yes.
so
But how much
the
is
budget,
the question?
The budget was structured in such a way that things like accountability, public, it's called public what?
Administration and
Yeah,
public,
public, yeah.
and public sector management.
Yes, all those saw a growth in how much money they are getting, but that's mostly for patronage purposes. It has nothing to do with accountability. Those people can get more money, but it won't solve the problem we have. And that someone has talked about the lack of empathy in this country. You have people who live, they tax, because if you're taxing someone who has 500,000 and you're taxing them and they can barely afford food for their children, but you're taxing them so that you can drive a car that only drug dealers should drive, so to speak. That's the problem. The problem is not so much, you can increase accountability funding to whatever amount, but if people are not being honest, people are not being empathetic, it will not matter. I'll try and look for the numbers, but accountability did get an increase. I just don't remember.
I saw the increase, but I think it's very modest. The increase for accountability is quite modest. I'll also try and look up.
Because
look up the
you see,
numbers.
you're talking about accountability, but we are talking about quality of labor force, and education is not getting much of an increment. Health is not getting much of an increment. That's where the population is. That's where the population spends their money. So those are some of the problems.
Lydia, if you're bleeding this 40 trillion budget on public administration, the cost of public administration, yes, you have works and transport getting the most money, but roads, yes, lead to, but they do not create immediate money. Or roads and other infrastructure do not create immediate money. That investment is longer term. If you're not addressing corruption as you should address it, if Kasaija in his budget doesn't speak about government living within its means, and someone was joking the other day when the president talked about being told in Masaka that when he was going to Kalangala, that nowadays there is traffic jam, and someone joked and said, but Mr. President, if you have a convoy of 40 vehicles, obviously in any village in this country where you take that convoy, there will be traffic jam for that day. And that the person who told you that in Luganda didn't mean that there are more cars in that area. It meant that because you have come, there is traffic jam because you're coming with along the way. If you're not addressing those basics, if you're not talking about the consumptive nature, not just of citizens, but of government, in a national budget, are you actually driving a budget that will lead to this transformation and cause the things that Kasaija was promising? That economy of his is...
That is going... Well, that is now the problem, because once you have a population that is, or a budget that's encouraging more consumption over production, then there is an issue. There is reason for us to worry. Why? Because if people are not producing the much needed goods that they should, or the much needed products that will eventually boost the economy, provide the jobs, which should reduce on poverty and the inequality gap that we have, then we shall keep running in circles. Yeah, we shall remain poor. Those who think they are okay, when they are also actually poor, tomorrow will be worse off. And what will that mean for the future of our country? What are we working for? If you're working and you can't afford some basics, or one person who is working is supporting like 5 people also in any given family, how are you expecting that person to transform themselves, just them as an individual? Yet they are the very people who are financing someone's lavish lifestyle. A supplementary budget every year, it's almost not news anymore. I mean,
there was a proposal once that supplementary budgets would be included in the national budget before it is read.
Terrible,
You had
terrible.
that proposal some years back.
So if we have an economy that is not thinking of ways of really bringing more people on board, it's nothing about ways of reducing unemployment. Yes, they are telling us the industries are there. SMEs, you can now rush to the industrial zones and to the industrial parks, and free zones to set up. But the issue is to do with the capital. If you're looking at an SME that is worth 3.7 billion, let's ask ourselves, how many startups are at that value? Are they still SMEs, or we are still targeting another section of businesses who are not even Ugandan, much as we are, covering it up under an incentive for small businesses? So yes, it's an incentive that has been created in this budget that businesses should benefit from, but there are issues there. We need to talk about the actual ways in which these people are going to benefit. If we are not, then we are we are just amusing ourselves that, oh, something is actually being done when there is actually no impact. Recently, some people who have invested there, some businesses, came out to give the challenges that they faced. What we don't know is whether those challenges were addressed or they just listened to them and went back and said, okay, let's now reduce the threshold from $5 million to 1 million, which is now the 3.7 billion. The challenge is how many fit in that? How many businesses which are starting up can actually, go and benefit from such an incentive?
Okay. Just
But
a quick
maybe
one
on
to-
your point
yes.
on your corruption.
Yes.
Sorry, Lydia, to cut you
Sure,
short.
go ahead.
But you asked, does Kasaija say anything about corruption? The biggest one that I saw on corruption, or linking, trying to fight corruption, was that he actually reduced the amount of money that a whistleblower would get when you report somebody who's dodging taxes. So it used to be at 10%. He's pushed it down to 5%. So I do not know whether he's trying to fight corruption in that sense or trying to
disincentivize
disincentivize
whistleblowing.
it, because I did not see why he had to bring it down from 10 to 5%. Yeah. But
Some of the biggest fights internally, if you find out, you'll find that people who the whistleblower, whether the money actually gets processed and paid, who gets paid it, that has been one of the major issues, whether you can actually whistleblow and remain anonymous. Because you have that claim process, whether you can remain anonymous, that's where people get busted,
Yes.
and they sort each other out outside of.
he probably needed to increase the money.
Dictor, let me come back to you before we take the break. You have about 3 issues. You talked about it, the consumptive nature of government, and therefore the citizenry. We're very consumptive in outlook. Less production, less savings across the board is one major issue. I don't know how that gets dealt with to make sure that we are finding a little bit more of a budget. We are moving towards a tax to GDP ratio that is agreeable, both at governmental level and at citizenry level. You have a second issue around how you translate incentives to the people who actually need them.
Charles, they keep giving these incentives to industrialists, but if you look at our FDIs, they don't change a lot. And years when we have not had oil companies come in, they are almost the same. We've been investing.
And FDIs, you're talking about foreign direct investments.
Yeah, foreign direct investments. It means some of those incentives are not working to attract foreign investors. So why don't we focus on our people locally? One of the biggest things that local businesses have been complaining about is how they are taxed. you start a business within a few, even before you start paying, before you are able to pay your workers, you're being closed for not paying tax. People keep closing and opening because they cannot afford the taxes. So the government has failed to focus on how do we develop our local investors. And the second thing is, we've been investing in works and transport for the last almost 15 years. I think we started in 2007, 2008 financial year. How can we, more than 10 years, and this is not delivering returns? Should we still be investing? Someone the other day was saying it's like you deciding, I need chairs in my sitting room. So you go, you buy the chairs, and then for the whole month, the family has nothing to eat. That's what our government has been doing for the last 10 years. That does not make sense. They need to reduce the investment in works and transport, unless there is something else. Because after all, the World Bank some time back said, every shilling we invest, we get back 0.7. So we are losing negative. We are getting
for every dollar.
So for every dollar we are getting less value. For every dollar we invest in infrastructure, we are getting less value. So maybe we need to rethink this policy and even reduce how much the government is spending. Because imagine Kenya right now has 5.2 as their fiscal deficit. In this region, they have been the big spenders, the ones that are spending a lot. Now Uganda has taken that position, and what are we doing with it? Because if you're spending all that money but you can't feed your wives and children,
it's a difficult one for me, because if you see the investment in infrastructure, in opening up the country over the last few years, since the creation of UNRWA, when we jumped over 1 trillion shillings as a budget allocation to the road sector, you see you see visible results. Yes, the benefits might come slowly than you expected them, but it leads to a realization that you took so long to make that investment before. So investment in things like roads, power generation, if we had also followed that up with investment in things like education for the quality of people you produce, and in health more decisively, that you don't have ghost health facilities, you actually have functional health facilities to improve people's health, you might make an argument. It's a difficult one to argue. It's difficult to argue against opening up of the country and opening up all these roads. It becomes a little complex. Yes, you'll give an example of what you see here on Ginger Road, that the road folds on one side, which is bringing in heavy cargo, when the other side is still smooth. And you're saying, so why did you build this road to facilitate all these imports instead of facilitating exports? Why didn't you put the money in building the railway? We're pushing forward investment in the SGR, and we're going to invest in the meter gauge railway after spending so much time debating SGR. We are putting more money into purchasing the aeroplanes and reviving the Uganda Airlines. How much have we put into providing cargo that the Uganda Airlines will take? Because the planes we're talking about so far are still passenger aircraft, where the cargo, maybe Uganda Air Cargo will be catering for the cargo that's coming out of the country. To create that balance is a bit of a difficulty. Musa Lado is watching us and says, Charles, protectionism policy is the way to go. All developed countries do that. America First mantra being spearheaded by President Trump is essentially protectionism. The challenge for Uganda is that Ugandans seems to prefer foreign-made products to locally manufactured goods for psychological reasons. Over time, Africans have been made to believe that imported stuff are better than locally manufactured products. Musa Ladu, I hear you on this. My colleagues here will have answers, will respond to your comment. My quick one is something I've been joking about. Moving up this low roundabout around Garden City and Oasis Mall. A vehicle with police registration numbers is clearing a lead car with a siren, blaring siren, opening the road for some important people. Behind it are 3 SUV jeeps with the ordinary plates, all of them looking new. Who are the people being driven in those jeeps? All of them Asian looking, Chinese for this matter. And I was thinking, okay, so if you're talking about build Uganda, buy Uganda, build Uganda, you're talking about locally produced products. Is it just about them being made in Uganda, or also who is the person producing these products? Does that also matter in part of this as part of this protectionism? If you have other people coming and doing the manufacturing for you and taking out all the profit, like government has been complaining about, then for whom are you building this? How do you encourage local manufacturing? Because you might encourage local manufacturing, and the only thing is made in Uganda. Whether Ugandans are involved in that process beyond being workers who are paid poorly, like the NSSF numbers show us, is a completely different matter. I don't know what you guys have to say about this.
I think,
and then someone was joking about why everybody trying to build a factory thinks, especially our Chinese friends and the Indian friends, think that the only place you can build a factory is a wetland. And that means long term. I don't know how the budget addresses some of those issues. A quick comment from all of you, and then we'll take a break.
For me, on the point of Bubu, build Uganda, buy Uganda, I think we'll find issues on areas such as the shareholding. And this is what we see in terms of local content. So, I mean, if you have a Chinese who owns probably 48 or 49% of the business, but has more voting rights in that company, does that make it local? If you have a Ugandan who imports cement from China or whatever, from wherever, and I mean comes and puts it
and dumps it here
in his market, and you know, brands it as you say Ugandan, does that make him local? How much local material does a local investor, a Ugandan investor, have to have in his product to qualify to be called local?
Okay.
So we're going to have so many of those issues.
The English South African rate is 35%.
Yeah, 35. Yeah, but I mean, in terms of implementation, in terms of supervision and that kind of stuff.
Is it actually 35%?
Is it like 35%? So I mean,
60% or 50?
35.
Okay.
35?
We need to take a quick commercial break. Do you want to comment on that quickly before we take a break? Or you can hold your thought until after the break. Manteja Simo is watching us and says, Charles, are you not going to discuss the broad day shameless robbery at Bank of Uganda superintended by Uganda's top cream? And Manteja Simo, like I said at the beginning of the show, the details on that, the facts are shifting. We don't know exactly what the story is. We have teams trying to find out what the story is, but we'll discuss it in the last quarter. We'll discuss a little bit about it in the last quarter of the show when we come out of the commercial break. We'll be right back. Mike Segawa is watching us and says, Dicta raises a very important issue of taxing starting businesses way before breaking even. Imagine starting a small business in a town like Mukono. You have to register a company, pay license fees for the Mukono division at KCCA rates, depending on the nature of business, pay for local service tax, and then Uganda Revenue Authority comes in and values you before charging for income tax. This is on top of the rent, where also the landlord is charged their taxes, and of course, the goods that you resell, but have already paid taxes elsewhere. Mind you, the burden still goes back to the consumers. But of course, it slows down the business. Mike Segawa. You, ladies and gentlemen, you agree that, Dicta, in your story, you say, and the other reports, the Uganda Revenue Authority is prepared to squeeze taxpayers harder. How realistic? What does this mean?
No, there is always opportunity to squeeze taxpayers harder. We've seen, for example, companies now are being asked, companies that used to have salespeople, if you are providing them with an office, then they're providing them with an office, requiring them to bring certain targets and so on and so forth. They are calling those employees, and they are going to have to pay as you earn. So the choices for those companies is to either sack those people so that they can go look for their own offices, and if given that we already know that these people are earning very little, that means they can't afford offices, so productivity goes down, or the company's expenses have to increase, and maybe it could mean death. For me, the alternative is you allow companies to grow, especially the local ones. rather than go and that would mean some bit of austerity, and that's what I was saying about things like infrastructure. You should not have roads as an end in itself. Growing up, going to school, I walked to school for my primary school. You'd find old men digging in the sides of the road, making sure Maram is back on the road. If you have a Maram road that is motorable, that's much better than you going to China, borrowing money, getting Chinese cement, getting Chinese workers to build a road where the people where it's going can't afford to use it for anything.
Well, we can get a whole show to discuss that. I don't know what the other people think about that. But my problem with some of this investment is not that the investment is being made. I'm actually happy that the investment is being made because I think we're way too late to make that investment. I come from Fort Portal. One of the biggest debates we had for very many years was that Fort Portal Kampala Road, divided in different sections. It was the first NRM road. It took 20 years to complete. But since its completion, by the time it was being completed, number one is that sections were breaking up already, needed to be redone. Now, the section between Fort Portal and Kienjojo is being reworked today. It's nearing completion. But you see how much volume of business it has facilitated, even over the delay. And many people will tell you that delay cost the development of that area. Now, people no longer debate in this country, I mean in Kampala, about matoke produced in Fort Portal coming, in Kabarole area, coming to Kampala. Because the matoke produced in Bushenyi, in Imbarara, in Intungamo, is finding a market in Rwanda and Tanzania. So the one that's feeding Kampala is largely coming from that area and from areas of Masaka where people are trying to revive their banana plantations. So, and the large contribution, the biggest contribution of that is because you have a road that can bring those products in here. And there are other things that people never used to sell. You have Kenyan trucks driving all the way up to Kagadi to pick maize because you have a road there. My question is what we saw the Daily Nation report the other day, that negotiators for the standard gauge railway padded in the loan agreement with Chinese a lot of money to steal. So if you have roads being built in this country and a lot of the money, part of the money is padded in as money to be stolen, like we are debating, we might have a little discussion about part of the version of the Bank of Uganda story, that money was printed without being authorized to have been printed, then you have a problem there. But the infrastructure itself, I don't think I have a major problem. Ivan Okuda and Rusho are debating on some forum the number I gave about the savings with NSSF. This number that I gave, 93%, who can only collect 15 million shillings, is among savers of NSSF, not other Ugandans. And NSSF savers, on its register, I think it has about 2 million Ugandans. 2 million Ugandans, only about half are regular contributors. Others are irregular contributors. But what this means is that, and this includes all the money. The 15 million includes your own savings,
And your employers.
it includes your employer's contribution, it includes interest from NSSF. An example was given, if you're earning an average rate of 1 million shillings for 20 years, you save for yourself 6 million shillings.
In 20 years.
In 20 years. Because that is 50,000 per month.
Yeah.
It comes
But the
to
problem is,
just-
after
just-
20
just a
years,
minute.
that money will have lost value.
just a minute. But that's the reality. And that means your employer adds for you 12 million shillings.
Yeah.
That makes it 18 million shillings. You get 25 million. If you're earning 1 million, you get 25 million because the other balance is interest. If you're earning a constant 1 million shillings. But you see, people will start at 100,000, graduate to 150,000, 200,000. By the time they reach the average of 416,000, to be able to save about 50,000, I mean, by the time they graduate to the 20 million, hey, it's been a long struggle, way below. But this is not part of the budget discussion that we're having. We should concentrate on the budget discussion for now.
Well.
I'd like us to switch a little because this is the last. So Ivan is watching us from Johannesburg, and Ruto is watching us from here, so I hope you get the clarification there. I'm still wondering, you guys are business editors, you're an investigator, you're a writer. Help us understand this Bank of Uganda story. What is the story? What are we finding out? What's the Bank of Uganda story?
The story just has everything wrong about this economy. I can't put the story to what it is because it's still developing, but that money can be printed in that way.
Was there money printed? Was extra money printed? Because that's part of the debate. Initially, the very first bits of the story was extra money had been printed without being ordered. So it was printed without the top honchos in Bank of Uganda, I mean, the decision makers sanctioning its print. Later, we are getting versions that say it was just a question of people hitching a ride with their cargo on a chartered plane. I don't know which it is, but you guys are you're deploying reporters to investigate and find out. What's the story?
That Bank of Uganda could charter a plane for money that is not even in trillions. I don't get it.
Jeff, what's the story?
The story is that anything can happen in this country. And I mean, it just boggles the mind. You know, for me, away from the story is, you know, the management at Bank of Uganda. Absolutely. You know, I am one of those people who had a lot of faith,
respect,
a lot of respect in the technocrats at Bank of Uganda. I have lost nearly.
You haven't answered my question. I need someone to answer the question. What do we know? What don't we know?
Yes. Either way, the story is bad. So in both cases, both stories came from government sources. One was that money was printed outside of what had been ordered.
You tend to read that in the wording of Nakalema's statement. Yes. The initial.
Yes. So you have that. Okay. Now, that's scandalous. But let's assume it's not true that some private individuals put cargo on a plane chartered by Bank of Uganda. That's scandalous too, because if you can go like a boda a matatu picking goods from this one. What's to stop someone who knows what's there? What's to stop them from picking that money from there? And who will Bank of Uganda ask? So either way, and you know that's the problem. Bank of Uganda is one of the most opaque institutions we have in Uganda. And unlike Jeff, I've always thought every institution that is opaque has a problem. Yes, they can have that aura of we are good at what we do, we employ the best people, we pay a lot of money so that our good people can stay. But if an institution is opaque, that's always going to happen. You'll have a lot of messes.
Do you want to tie that comment with, because Bank of Uganda has been going through very, very difficult times with the audit report, with the investigation of Parliament, and that is actually an ending. And it's opening a lot of Pandora's box, because one of the things that we'll have to deal with soon is that because you did not close the files of liquidation of the banks you closed, you kept those cases alive. I have been told that quietly, Bank of Uganda was beginning to think about negotiating with some of these banks. Settle with them quietly, because after the investigation, you have a risk of opening a Pandora's box of litigation. Those who have tried to litigate, one of the people who have tried to litigate, I have hosted him here, Chris Tushabe, they were referring to him again. He's been writing to the speaker saying, please allow the committee to reopen my case and hear me out. I think people of Crane Bank have also been asking questions. Why do you stop this investigation before it is concluded? Let's see it up to those things, that aspects that the Katuntu committee did not investigate. Let's have the Munyagwa committee complete some of those investigations and give clearer recommendations on whether we can pursue Bank of Uganda. Now, even before you emerge out of that, you're entangled in this scandal. One, a strand that says you printed extra money, which suggests collusion. Two is you negotiated on sharing the cost of chartering a plane. Now, for Bank of Uganda actually carrying in money, that's a huge scandal on its
Yes.
own. It's like, guys, you'll find in Wandegea, border riders, if they're moving in the evening
Yeah.
through Wandegea and going to Waise, they can actually pick more than 3 passengers who do not know each other. So you find a border that's carrying 3 passengers and they don't know each other, but they're sharing the cost of the trip. Now, for Bank of Uganda. But, Dictor, the scandal of printing extra money, extra currency than you need is alive.
Yeah.
It has happened in Liberia.
Yes.
Liberia printed $101 million, $102 million in local currency, local Liberian currency,
What
which
about
was
that?
brought into the country just around the time of transition from Ellen Johnson Sirleaf to George Weah. Well, arrests have been made there and investigations have been going on. So if you link what happened in Liberia to what some of the version of story coming out of Bank of Uganda is that it's actually possible
Yeah.
that extra money can be, extra currency can be
Yes,
printed.
yes.
But how does Bank of Uganda get out of this? Jeff?
I mean, the only way that Bank of Uganda will get out of this is if they pass on the blame to the customs or to the guys at the aviation.
You've seen the statement from
Yes,
Uganda
they-
Revenue Authority?
They are all issuing statements, but because I mean, Bank of Uganda depends on one thing mostly, and for every central bank is that its credibility in the market has to stand out. And right now, Bank of Uganda is losing a lot of credibility. So, I think I expect a lot of blame being passed on to these other institutions, and I think Bank of Uganda is going to push for that to try and get itself out of this mess. Otherwise, I do not see them.
Well, they could try
Lydia,
that,
do we
but my
know if
thinking-
these officials who have been arrested will be arraigned in court sooner? Because
No, they
one,
won't.
Huh?
They won't because
Why
the
do you
story
think
They
so?
have
has
not got
changed.
no report, and
No, because the story has changed. Supposedly, it wasn't currency; it was something else, and they seem to understand it. And Charles, for the question you asked, Jeff, I think because for a long time, Bank of Uganda resisted being investigations from Parliament. One of the things that must happen to Bank of Uganda is one, heads must roll, starting from the top. But after
As
you've done
long
that
as-
cleanup, open up that institution, like
To
everywhere
have
else.
a
So that
clean
they are,
audit.
because if
They need
you're
a proper
saying we
audit.
depend on credibility, but no one knows what you're doing, how do you keep
If
that
they are
credibility?
operating,
And every time something happens, it's a serious scandal. What's that?
for
Heads
any
must roll.
institution to operate without any clear auditing, they are really putting themselves
Because
in more
what-
trouble.
what-
Without an independent body that audits the institution of Bank of Uganda, I'm afraid we might keep seeing more of this, because that body would then query,
But wouldn't
before
they
any
argue that,
any
like
decision
they
is
have always
taken.
argued for many
But
years,
if
that
you're the chairman,
Lydia, wouldn't Bank of Uganda justifiably argue and say, we have kept this economy, because they are at that level, we have kept this economy in good shape for this long by decisive action or when we needed to act? I can see all of you are
is
laughing.
it in good shape? Is it in good shape?
Is this economy
Is this in good shape? I don't
Because-
think so.
because
No,
you
no,
see,
maybe
so
that
just-
no for
We will
Bank of
remember the
Uganda. Bank of
times.
Uganda's responsibility is on
stable inflation.
yes,
Yes.
to keep
Yeah,
the
but
inflation
do you
stable.
know-
do you know
or
how
within
they are
the-
companies
They're
that
monetary
inflation
policy.
figures
but-
are
but
released
that's-
every
those-
month.
those are the
but
things we be.
much as they are released, there is a different picture on the ground. So we begin wondering, what figures do we get on a monthly basis, saying inflation or CBR, whatever
we have
it is?
a new release coming up, I think, this week or tomorrow.
Seriously?
I wanted to say that, you see, you're saying that but what they've done is to squeeze this economy such that, like, people can barely survive. You have children stunted, you have mothers who are anemic to almost 30%,
cost of
because they've
living
been
is
squeezing
high.
the economy, because the fundamentals they are supposed to be dealing with. I mean, when the NRM government came to power in 1986, they got the dollar to the shilling at a certain rate. Where are we now? How much
We are
value have we
almost
lost?
at 4,000.
Whose job is that? Is that?
I think as late as 1997, the dollar to shilling exchange rate was about $1.700 Uganda shillings,
Yes.
which was called them $7 then.
Yes.
Yes.
So So when you say because they have just made sure we have no money to spend and therefore inflation can't go up, but everything else is, because if you have, we shall soon cross the 4,000. So what good shape are you talking about?
But Dictor, I mean, the IMF has come out and praised Bank of Uganda through its assessments of keeping monetary policy in check. Are you in a way saying that the IMF's thumbs up? Are you saying that the IMF is also in collusion with Bank of Uganda, that everything in this market is?
Let me not involve the IMF, but let me do this. You have an economy that's actually not functioning for its population. Yes. We agree on that, yeah?
Yeah.
So
prices are high.
No, because here's the thing. So we have an economy that grew 6.2%, yeah? But you have people who can't afford to educate their children. You have wives who are anemic because they are not getting the food they need. Yes. You have children, more than half, who can't be, who are malnourished. So, like, how else do you determine an economy that's working? The prices of
goods are too high.
It simply means you know, because you can say we have economic growth, yes, but that's because the government is the main spender. But it's spending on
it's
who?
not reflected in
that
everybody.
growth is not reflected in our lifestyle.
I think Victor raises a very valid argument.
I mean, she's right.
On the show we had last week, when we were discussing the State of the Nation address, someone sent me a question and said, which I shared on my Twitter, and people reacted very, very passionately about it. If the growth numbers that the president was throwing around, he said Uganda has grown, not any country in Europe, except for West Germany, has grown faster than Uganda in the last so many years. The question was, why is Uganda still where it was?
Why are we still a least developed country?
You remain a least developed country. You remain the third, which would be, without expanding the East African community, you remain the weakest economy within even the East African community. Kenya has been better than you. Tanzania has been better than you consistently for all those years. You haven't leapfrogged any single country to improve, to get better. So you're running and you say, I have been running consistently and faster than anyone else, but you're still in the same position. All those who are ahead of you are still ahead of you. The few who are behind you are still behind you. So how do you translate this to an ordinary person to understand and say, wait a minute, if you say we have been growing consistent at 6% per annum, it should give us something over a country that was growing at 2%, of a country that was growing at 3%, of a country that was growing at 4%, of a country that was growing at 5%. What does your 6%, what do you have to show for your 6%? The same question that Dictor is raising about Bank of Uganda. If you have suppressed and maintained low inflation for those many years, what does it mean? It needs to be it needs to be unpacked.
It's not an end in itself.
Yes.
These things are supposed to deliver us to a certain place, and that's not happening. Why? The other day, the World Bank said
the middle income dream. 2020 is here, but
we'll push that forward. You know, we started with Vision 2025. That's if
the other day, the World Bank said, you remove UPE because people are not crossing over. It means our kids are not learning. But for World Bank, they are like, no, let's remove UPE. And because all those, when you grow...
they did not say remove UPE. They said remove examinations at PLE.
Yeah, that's what I meant, sorry. I meant
that an
examinations.
itself?
Yeah, so the point I'm making is that every measure you look at in our economy says we are not doing well.
Okay.
Other than the numbers that the economists can claim we are doing well.
Okay. I'm afraid our time is out. We need to get out of here. Mike Segawa came back to us and said, first, give kudos to Professor Mutebile for whistleblowing, and we should be studying what Kanona Kalema is doing. See, where was ESO, Civil Aviation Authority, Internal Security Organization, Police, and where is the IGG? Well, if you create another body and say it is responsible for certain things, it means these other more established, more institutionalized bodies, even if they went to sleep on their job because you have created another one, you haven't strengthened them. Mike, if that answers you, I don't know if it does. I also take about 3 other messages from other viewers. Chris Tushabe has maintained he's been the most consistent over the last 20 years since they closed Cooperative Bank to say, I have been cheated, I have been cheated. He cried and everybody chased him. At one time I was told the governor wouldn't meet him, even would touch him with a long stick because he had been told this guy's the biggest. And then I think it was on one of the shows when we had him here, and the MP, his area MP, Margaret Muhanga, sent a message and said, if that guy was not convicted about his claims that he had been cheated, he would have abandoned his story, but he's been the most consistent, meaning that he has issues. So he says, Bank of Uganda has kept our economy where it is by cheating us. Let heads roll if trust is to be restored. Another viewer here says, it's a very long message. But Charles, while Uganda claims it has a private sector-led economy, in the national budget, we don't see reflection of the private sector role in terms of real investment they make. Actual numbers of monies, rate of interest in Uganda being a favorite investment destination, and the actual numbers of Ugandans employed, etc., not the deceptive numbers of factories opened. I don't see you guys address or analyze the serious side of Uganda should revert to public sector-led economy so that government officials don't see plenty of money available, yet it is allocated largely to consumptive sectors' activities. Yet the private sector they use as a scapegoat for employing Ugandans, yet because they are profit-oriented, they cannot prioritize employment of Ugandans. At adoption of romantic private sector-led economy approach, government run away from what it wants private people to do for the country. You run away from your responsibility and all flimsy excuses, and you admire and beg from capitalist China, which runs a public sector-led economy, the second most powerful economy in the world. Boss, this message is very, very long. I am getting confused along the way. Let me take the last one. Charles, Uganda Zabu.
Anything goes.
This is Chakolaga Michael watching from Kayunga district. Thank you, Chakolaga Michael, for the message, and we'll bring the discussion to an end. I want to thank you very much, Lydia Namono, from business editor at the Daily Monitor. Thank you very much, Jeff Mbanga, business editor at The Observer. And thank you very much, Dictor Simwe, who's a writer with the East African newspaper. Thank you very much to you, all our viewers, for joining us tonight. And always, and those who sent us feedback, continue this debate on our social media platforms, on Facebook,
the issue
on Facebook, on Twitter. Let's continue the debate, and we'll is continuing to investigate and follow the story. What happened at Bank of Uganda? We'll continue also to interrogate the budget until we make sense of it, if we are able to make sense of it. For me, it's a good night.